The story begins with Jonathan Harker, a young English solicitor, making his way through the rugged lands of Transylvania. The purpose of his journey is simple enough. He has been hired to finalize the purchase of an estate in England by a nobleman, known as Count Dracula. Yet from the moment he leaves the familiar world of Western Europe, Jonathan feels himself sliding into a darker, stranger realm. The train rattles through mountains where the forests seem endless, their pines whispering, like watchful sentinels. In the villages, peasants cross themselves when he mentions his destination. They press strange charms into his hand, bits of garlic, tiny silver crosses, crude carvings of wolves. Their words tumble out in a language he struggles to understand, but their eyes wide with terror tell him enough, do not go. Night falls quickly in those mountains. When Jonathan finally boards the carriage sent to collect him, the horses strain against their harnesses as though dreading the path ahead. The driver, cloaked, silent, his face half hidden, pushes them on through winding passes. Wolves howl from the forests, closer each time, as if circling the coach. At last, looming against the pale light of the moon, Castle Dracula rises. Its spires cut jagged shapes into the sky, its stones black with age and shadow. No torchlight burns. In its windows, no welcome waits at its gates. It seems less a home than a grave standing against eternity. The driver vanishes without a word, leaving Jonathan alone before the heavy oak doors. When they creak open, a tall figure emerges. Cloaked in black, his eyes gleam with unnatural brightness, and his voice carries the weight of command wrapped in courtesy. "Welcome to my house," the Count says, bowing slightly. "Enter freely and of your own will." Jonathan steps inside. The doors shut behind him with a finality that echoes like the lid of a coffin. He does not yet know it, but he has entered a prison disguised as a castle, and the master who greets him is no man at all. Asterisk, asterisk, Jonathan Harker tells himself at first that he has simply been working too hard, that the strangeness of his journey has colored his imagination. But the longer he stays within the walls of Castle Dracula, the more he realizes that something is terribly, terribly wrong. The rooms are vast, yet lifeless. Their furniture old and dust-laden, as if no one has truly lived here in centuries. There are no servants, none at all. Meals appear on silver trays, steaming and rich, but Jonathan never sees a hand place them there. Only Count Dracula himself walks the corridors silent, gliding, always near when Jonathan least expects it. The Count is courteous, even charming. He speaks in perfect English, though his accent is heavy and his manner formal, as though mimicking a language he has studied rather than lived. He questions Jonathan endlessly about London, its streets, its customs, its people. His eyes burn. When Jonathan speaks of the crowded city, of bustling strangers, of life flowing ceaselessly in the night, but in their conversations, Jonathan notices things he cannot explain. The Count never eats with him. Wine is poured, but Dracula does not drink. When Jonathan accidentally pricks his finger with a shaving razor one morning, the Count's reaction is not of concern, but of hunger, a sudden furious gleam in his eyes, a sharp inhalation of breath, his hand darting forward before he snatches it back. Trembling, Jonathan begins to test the castle's mysteries. He finds doors locked, hallways that twist into nothing. At night, he hears movement in places that should be empty. Once, in the dead hours, he wakes to the sound of something scraping outside his window. Peering through the shutters, his breath catches in his throat. The Count, crawling down the sheer stone wall like a monstrous insect, his cloak flapping against the wind, his body defying gravity. A chill seizes Jonathan's spine. This is no ordinary man. Days pass in dread. Jonathan writes in his journal by candlelight, recording what he dares not say aloud. "The castle is a prison," he writes, "and I am a prisoner." One night, unable to bear the silence, Jonathan explores further. The air is heavy, the corridors suffocating. He pushes through a half-open door into a chamber thick with shadows. 3 women stand within, their beauty unearthly, their eyes gleaming with hunger. They drift toward him like dancers, their whispers wrapping around him like silk. Stay. With us, one purrs. Just a taste, another whispers, her lips parting to reveal sharp, glistening teeth. Jonathan is frozen, caught between terror and a strange, shameful longing. Their breath is cold against his neck, their hands on his shoulders. Just as he feels the sting of teeth against his skin, the door bursts open. The Count storms in, fury blazing. Yeah, his voice cracks like thunder. This man is mine. Touch him not. Women recoil, hissing, their beauty twisting into venomous malice. They vanish into the shadows, leaving Jonathan trembling on the floor. Dracula glares down at him, his voice low, almost gentle, but every word strikes like iron. You are safe, for now. Do not wander where you are not invited. Knows then, with dreadful certainty, that he is no guest. He is prey, being fattened on false kindness, until the Count chooses otherwise. And beyond these ancient walls, Dracula's hunger stretches far, all the way to England, where his true hunt is yet to begin. The Demeter was a stout Russian schooner, built to weather storms and haul heavy cargo. When it set sail from Varna, the crew believed they carried nothing more sinister than boxes of earth, bound for Whitby, England. A strange cargo, perhaps, but nothing that smelled of danger. The captain was a seasoned man, broad-shouldered, his eyes carved by years of sea squalls. His log, later recovered, gives us the truth of what happened, a truth almost too dreadful to believe. At first all was well. The weather was clear, the wind steady. The boxes lay stacked in the hold, each nailed shut, each filled with Transylvanian soil. But soon unease crept over the ship. Men whispered of shadows shifting below deck. A sailor swore he saw movement, as if something crawled from one of the boxes at night, then slipped back before dawn. The captain dismissed it as sailor's superstition. But then came the howling. On the second week at sea, a crewman was found, dead, his throat torn open as though by wild beasts. No animal could have reached the ship. No hand among them could have made such wounds. Fear spread like fire through the crew. The captain ordered every inch of the vessel searched. Nothing was found, nothing but boxes of earth. Yet that night, another sailor vanished, his boots left behind, his bunk drenched with blood. The crew began to mutter of an evil presence. Some spoke of a tall, thin figure stalking the deck when the moon was high. They swore his eyes gleamed red, his cloak snapping like wings. By the third week, men refused to sleep below deck. They huddled near the masts, clutching crucifixes, muttering prayers in trembling voices. The first mate begged the captain to turn back, but the old man would not yield. He would see his cargo delivered, and so the voyage became a death march. One by one, the sailors disappeared. Some were found drained of blood, others were never seen again, save for their screams vanishing into the wind in his log. The captain's handwriting grew frantic. God help us. The crew are nearly gone, the thing is among us. I have seen it, a gaunt monster with burning eyes. It comes at night. I have locked myself at the helm and pray I can steer us to shore before it takes me as well. Days later, Whitby awoke to the wreck of the Demeter. The schooner had run aground in a storm, her sails tattered, her deck deserted. Not a single living soul remained on board. The captain's body was found lashed to the wheel, his eyes open, his crucifix still clutched in stiff, frozen fingers. His log lay nearby, a record of the voyage that ended in nightmare, and of the cargo. The boxes of earth had vanished. Witnesses swore they saw a great black dog leap from the ship's hold, sprint across the shore, and vanish into the cliffs above Whitby. Count Dracula had arrived in England. The hunt was only beginning. The summer in Whitby should have been a season of peace. The sea was calm, the skies gentle, and the days long with golden light. Yet in one household, a quiet darkness had already begun to gather. Lucy Westenra, radiant and full of life, was loved by all who knew her. She was gentle-hearted, with eyes that seemed always on the brink of laughter. But most of all, she was loved by her dearest friend, Mina Murray. Soon to be the bride of Jonathan Harker, Mina had come to Whitby too, keep Lucy company, unaware that the terror her fiancé had endured in Transylvania was already on English soil. At first, Lucy seemed merely restless. She confessed to Mina that her sleep was troubled by strange dreams. She would wake in the night, pale and trembling, her hands clutching at her throat. Mina dismissed it as the stress of an engagement, for Lucy was soon to be married. Blah-da-da. Nights grew worse. Mina began to notice something stranger still in the morning. Lucy would sometimes be found out of bed, standing barefoot at the window, her eyes half open, as though sleepwalking. Her nightdress would flutter in the sea breeze, her skin ghostly white in the moonlight. One evening, Mina awoke to find Lucy gone. She rushed into the garden, where she saw her friend lying on a stone bench, the sea fog curling about her like grave shroud. And there, bent over Lucy's throat, was a tall, dark figure, gaunt. With eyes that gleamed red in the starlight, Mina cried out. The figure lifted its head, and for an instant she saw a face pale as death, lips glistening with blood. Then, like smoke, it was gone. Lucy stirred, confused and weak, whispering that she had dreamed of being kissed by something cold and merciless. Mina said nothing, for terror had sealed her tongue. In the days that followed, Lucy began to wither. Her cheeks lost their color, her step grew slow, and her laughter vanished. At night she tossed in fever, muttering of shadows and crimson eyes. The doctor was called Dr. Seward, a man of science and Lucy's faithful suitor. He was baffled. Her symptoms made no sense. She had no wound, no illness he could name. Yet each morning, 2 small marks appeared upon her neck, faint at first, and darkening like twin wounds. Desperate, Seward summoned his old mentor, Professor Abraham van Helsing. The Dutchman was a grave figure, his eyes sharp, his manner urgent. He examined Lucy with a physician's care, but what he found made him pale. "This is no common sickness," he whispered to Seward. "The girl is being drained, not by disease, but by something unnatural." He would say no more, for the truth was too dreadful to speak aloud. Instead, he demanded garlic flowers be placed around Lucy's bed. He insisted her windows be sealed. Her door kept locked, but superstition was no match for the cunning of the Count. One night, a servant removed the flowers, claiming their scent was too strong. That night, the shadow returned. When Mina entered Lucy's chamber the next morning, she found her friend near death, her skin as pale as marble, her lips barely moving. The marks upon her throat were dark as wounds. Van Helsing stood over the bed, his face grim. "It has begun," he said. "The girl is under his power. If we do not act swiftly, she will be lost to us. Forever." Mina wept, clinging to Lucy's hand. She did not yet understand the full truth that her beloved friend was being claimed. Body and Soul, by Count Dracula, and Lucy, though she hovered near death, whispered with a strange, sad smile, "He comes to me in the dark. He calls my name. I cannot resist him." Outside, the sea winds howled. The predator had chosen his prey. Lucy Westenra's doom was sealed. Asterisk, asterisk, Lucy Westenra was buried on a quiet morning, the sea air heavy with mist. To all who attended, she was mourned as a beloved daughter and friend, cut down too soon by some strange illness. Mina wept openly, and Dr. Seward could barely speak, his heart torn between grief and guilt. But Van Helsing's expression was not one of peace. His eyes remained sharp, restless, as though he expected the dead to rise before their very eyes. He alone knew the truth. Lucy's grave was not her end. Nights passed, and strange rumors stirred in Whitby. Mothers whispered of a pale woman seen wandering the churchyard, her lips red as roses, her eyes glowing in the dark. Children went missing, only to be found days later, dazed and weak, with wounds upon their throats. Dr. Seward dismissed these tales as hysteria, but Van Helsing pressed him. "You saw the marks upon her neck. You watched her waste away, though her blood was still warm. Do you not see? Lucy is no longer your patient. She is the servant of the vampire." The word hung in the air, blasphemous and unreal. Seward recoiled. "Vampires are superstition myths. Then come with me," Van Helsing replied gravely, "and see for yourself." That night they went to the churchyard. The wind moaned through the gravestones, and the earth at Lucy's burial site seemed still, too untouched. Van Helsing's hands trembled as he lifted the coffin lid. Lucy lay within, her beauty unspoiled, but her cheeks were flushed with unnatural color, her lips deep crimson, as though she had only just risen from a feast. Seward staggered back. "Cannot be, she is dead." Van Helsing's face was as stone. "No, she is undead." As if in answer, Lucy's eyes flickered. "Open." Slowly, she rose, her lips curling into a smile not of love, but of hunger. "Arthur," she whispered, naming her fiancé who stood frozen beside them. Her voice was soft, sweet, and terrible. "Come to me, my love. Do not keep me waiting." She held out her arms, her teeth glinting in the moonlight. Arthur would have gone to her. It's bewitched. But Van Helsing thrust a crucifix between them. Lucy hissed like a serpent, her face twisting with rage. She recoiled into the shadows, her beauty fading into a mask of death. The men stood shaken, their grief turned to horror. There was no longer any doubt. Lucy, once pure and kind, had become a predator. Arthur collapsed to his knees. "If this is true, if she has been damned, what must we do?" Van Helsing laid a hand on his shoulder. His words were heavy with sorrow. "We must set her free, not in cruelty, but in mercy. The stake will pierce her heart, the head must be severed, and only then will her soul find peace." Tears filled Arthur's eyes, but he nodded. "Then it shall be done." The next night they returned to Lucy's tomb. She came again, radiant and terrible, her arms reaching for Arthur. But this time he did not waver. With trembling hands, he drove the wooden stake into her heart. A piercing cry split the air. Not human, not of this world. Lucy's body writhed, then grew still. Her face softened, her lips lost their crimson, and in that final moment, she looked once more like the gentlewoman they had loved. Arthur fell beside her coffin, sobbing, while Van Helsing crossed himself. "It is done. She is at rest." But there was no triumph in his voice, only dread. For Lucy's fate was but the beginning. Count Dracula was in England. He had already taken one soul, and unless they stood united, many more would follow. Van Helsing's eyes burned with determination as he spoke to the others. "We have seen his power. Now we must hunt him, not as men of science, but as men of faith and courage. For he will not stop until his shadow covers all of London and beyond." The hunt had begun. Asterisk, asterisk. The autumn mist clung to London like a shroud. After Lucy's release, the group Van Helsing, Seward, Arthur, Quincy Morris, and Jonathan Harker swore an oath. They would dedicate themselves to destroying Dracula. Jonathan, pale and haunted, told them all of his imprisonment in the Count's castle in Transylvania. He spoke of wolves howling in the dark, of the vampire brides, and of the Count himself crawling down walls like a spider. His voice trembled, but Mina sat beside him, her hand steady on his. "You are safe now, Jonathan," she whispered. "Face him together." But even as she spoke, her eyes flicked nervously toward the windows. Somewhere in the night, she felt him watching. Strange things began to happen in their house. Doors stood open that had been locked. A mist crept beneath the threshold and lingered until dawn. Mina grew pale, her strength failing. At first, the men believed it grief, or the strain of tending to Jonathan. Then, one night, Seward entered her chamber and froze in horror. Mina lay upon the bed, her body slack as though in a trance. Over her leaned Dracula himself, his lips pressed against her throat. Blood ran down her collar. Jonathan, waking in terror, lunged forward, but the Count turned, his eyes blazing scarlet. For a heartbeat, Jonathan faltered, his mind clouded with the vampire's will. But Van Helsing thrust the crucifix before him, and Dracula recoiled with a hiss, his form dissolving into mist. The room filled with the stench of decay. Mina gasped. Waking, her hands trembling, she clutched Jonathan, sobbing. "He is taken of me," she whispered. her voice broken. His blood is in me. I am bound to him now. The men fell silent, the weight of her words chilling their resolve. Mina was no longer merely threatened, she was marked. From that night on, Mina became both ally and danger. Van Helsing insisted she remain at the heart of their plans, though she pleaded otherwise. She has a connection now, the professor explained. Through her, he may reach us, but also we may reach him. By hypnotizing Mina at sunrise and sunset, Van Helsing drew visions from her mind. She would tremble, her lips whispering fragments of Dracula's journey waves crashing against a ship's hull. The sound of wolves, the smell of damp earth. Each vision brought them closer to the Count's movements, yet every time Mina weakened. Her skin grew paler, her eyes shadowed, and on her throat the wounds remained raw. Jonathan's fury boiled. If he dares touch her again, I shall carve the heart from his chest with my own hands. Arthur gripped his shoulder. You will not stand alone, Quincy added. We hunt as one. One night, as the men gathered in Seward's study, a sudden knock rattled the window. The curtains billowed, though no wind stirred. And then, as if summoned, a low laugh filled the air. Dracula stood beyond the glass, his eyes burning like embers. You think to stop me, he said, his voice carrying. Though the window remained shut, already one of you is mine. Soon another. Your courage will fail, your prayers will fade. And when the sun sets forever, I shall walk among you as master. With that, the window shattered inward, though no stone touched it. Swept through the room, scattering crucifixes and papers. But Van Helsing held firm, raising the host in his hand. Begone, demon, he thundered. The mist coiled, shrieked, and fled into the night. Silence returned, broken only by Mina's sobs. She clung to Jonathan, trembling. From that moment, they knew London was no longer safe. The Count's coffin had been moved again, and again, hidden in shadows, guarded by the unknowing and the bewitched. To defeat him, they must find and sanctify each one, cutting off his sanctuary. Mina, though fading, begged to join their councils. Do not shut me out, she said. If he takes me, let my sacrifice count for something. Use my curse to find him. Van Helsing bowed his head. Then so it shall be. But no, this we will not rest until you are freed, or we fall beside you. And so, with Mina at their side, they began their relentless pursuit of Count Dracula through the alleys of London, across the wild countryside, and finally, back toward the dark mountains of Transylvania. The war for Mina's soul had begun. Asterisk, the hunt began under a steel-gray sky. With Mina's visions guiding them, the company pieced together Dracula's escape route. They discovered that the Count, weakened but not destroyed, had fled London. His last remaining coffins of earth were secretly loaded aboard ships bound for Eastern Europe. He seeks to return to his homeland, Van Helsing declared, voice grave. There, in the shadows of his castle, he will gather his strength again. If he reaches it, our chance is lost. Mina, pale and wrapped in blankets, whispered from her trance, I hear the rushing of water, a river, and men shouting in tongues not our own. He travels swiftly. He fears you, but he flees to power. Jonathan held her hand tightly. Then we will be swifter. It was decided. The company must divide, each taking a different road to cut off the Count's return. To Transylvania. Van Helsing and Mina would journey by carriage toward the Carpathians, aiming for Dracula's castle itself. Jonathan Harker and Arthur would pursue by rail, following the Danube toward the inland ports. Seward and Quincy would track the river itself, riding hard along its banks. It is a net we cast, said Van Helsing. He cannot slip through all threads. Mina clung to Jonathan before they parted. Her lips pressed to his ear, trembling. Promise me, husband. If I should change, if his curse takes me fully, do not let me live as he does. Jonathan's eyes filled with pain. I swear, he said. But you will not fall, Mina. We will end him first. Their journeys were harsh and unrelenting. Storms gathered as though the very heavens wished to aid their foe. Wolves prowled the roads. Strangers in small villages crossed themselves at the sight of the hunters. Muttering warnings, Van Helsing, guiding Mina through mountain passes, kept vigil every night, holy symbols at her bedside. By day he questioned peasants about strange carriages, about shipments of boxes, about a tall man cloaked in black. Each tale, each whisper, drove them onward. Jonathan, meanwhile, rode like a man possessed. The memory of Dracula's lips at Mina's throat burned in his mind, fueling his rage. Arthur struggled to keep pace with him, but dared not call him back. Seward and Quincy, battered by rain, rode their horses until the beasts foamed. They scoured the river ports, bribing sailors, searching manifests. Again and again, they heard of a strange cargo, heavy boxes bound for inland routes. Always the Count seemed one step ahead. At twilight one evening, Mina cried out from her trance. Her voice was no longer her own, it rang with Dracula's laughter. You hunt me, but the night is mine. Already I taste the soil of my land. You cannot stop the river. You cannot halt the storm. You cannot kill what has never lived. Her body convulsed, and Jonathan, though far away, felt his heart tear as if he had heard her himself. Van Helsing placed the host upon her brow, and at once she fell silent, trembling. When she awoke, tears streamed down her cheeks. He is near, she whispered, and he knows you come. Despite the Count's speed, the hunters pressed on, relentless. At every village they cut off allies and closed the distance. At last they learned of a great wagon carrying a long, heavy box, guarded by Romani loyal to Dracula. Making its way toward the Borgo past the gateway to the Count's castle, the hunters converged, racing by horseback across the frozen land. The wind howled. Snow slashed their faces. Mina, left in safety with Van Helsing at a convent, prayed ceaselessly as the others rode to meet fate. Jonathan's hand gripped the hilt of his knife. Tonight it ends. For Mina, for Lucy, for us all. Through the swirling snow, they saw it at last, the wagon, dragged by horses, crawling up the mountain path. Around it rode armed men, fierce and loyal. Quincy spurred his horse forward with a shout. Arthur followed, pistol raised. Jonathan rode like a madman, his eyes fixed only on the coffin that carried his enemy. The Romani shouted, drawing weapons. Steel rang against steel. Gunshots cracked, and in the storm of violence, the coffin lurched forward, but Jonathan leapt from his saddle, cutting down men as he forced his way to the wagon. With a cry like a man possessed, he seized the coffin lid, wrenching it free, and there, within the box, lay Dracula. His eyes closed, his face serene as death, his body resting in the earth of his homeland. Yet even in repose, his lips curled, faintly as though mocking them. The hunters raised their blades. The storm had risen into a fury as the hunters surrounded the wagon. Snow lashed across the Borgo Pass, a blizzard as though summoned by the Count himself. The wolves howled in the distance, their cries echoing like war drums. Jonathan Harker's face was a mask of cold determination. Its eyes, bloodshot from sleepless nights, burned with vengeance. At his side, Arthur raised his revolver. Quincy drew his long knife, lips pressed into a grim line. Behind them, the Romani guards closed, in howling their defiance, determined to protect the coffin of their master. But Jonathan had no fear left, only fury. With one last heave, Jonathan tore the coffin lid free. Snow and earth spilled out, and there he was, Count Dracula. The monster lay as though in peaceful repose. His skin was pale, but radiant with unearthly vitality. His lips curved, in a faint smile red against the whiteness of snow. Though his eyes were closed, his very presence chilled the marrow of their bones. Arthur's voice trembled with rage. Do it, Harker, before he wakes. But the Count stirred. Slowly, unnaturally, his eyes opened. Scarlet irises gleamed in the storm's twilight. His smile widened into mockery. Fools, he whispered, his voice like wind through a graveyard. You chase shadows. I am eternal. You cannot kill the night. The air itself seemed to darken as his body shifted, the strength of centuries returning. The Romani cried out and charged, clashing with the hunters in a frenzy of steel and blood. Gunshots cracked. Horses screamed. Blades flashed in the blinding snow. Quincy, bleeding from a gash across his side, fought like a man possessed. With every strike, he cleared a path toward the coffin. Arthur fired again and again, driving the guards back. Jonathan leapt into the coffin itself, knife raised high above the Count's chest. But Dracula's hand shot up with impossible speed, seizing Jonathan's wrist. The vampire's strength was overwhelming, crushing his bones like twigs. Jonathan cried out in agony. Dracula rose from his coffin, towering, his cloak unfurling like wings of darkness. The storm itself seemed to bow before him. "Your women are mine," he hissed. "Your souls are mine. Your world is mine." Flung Jonathan aside like a child, the man tumbled into the snow. But even as Dracula's power swelled, the hunters pressed on. Arthur hurled himself forward, slashing at the Count with his blade. Quincy, staggering and bleeding, climbed onto the wagon. His knife gleamed in the dying light of the storm. Dracula struck Arthur aside, his laughter echoing like thunder. "Shh, but..." In that instant, Quincy thrust his knife deep into the monster's chest. Jonathan, crawling from the snow, found his strength once more. With a cry torn from the depths of his soul, he drove his blade across Dracula's throat. The Count screamed not in rage, but in horror. His body convulsed, his eyes blazing with hatred and terror, and then, as the snowstorm howled around them, Count Dracula crumbled to dust. His scream vanished into the wind, and the coffin lay empty. The storm broke. The wind stilled. The snow fell gently now, blanketing the battlefield in eerie quiet. But victory had come at a cost. Quincy Morris, his hands still stained with Dracula's blood, slumped against the wagon. His wound was mortal. Jonathan and Arthur rushed to him, but he only smiled faintly. "It's done, lads," he whispered. "The devil's gone. The night is over." With one last breath, Quincy's eyes closed. He died with a smile, knowing their mission was complete. Epilogue days later, they gathered at Mina's side. The mark upon her forehead, once burning with Dracula's curse, had faded. She wept as Jonathan embraced her, free at last from the vampire's grip. Van Helsing, grave but at peace, spoke softly. "Evil is never fully gone. It waits in the shadows, but for now. The dawn belongs to us." And so, beneath the rising sun, over the Carpathian mountains, they left the Borgo Pass behind. Dracula, the Prince of Darkness, was no more. But in the silent ruins of his castle, the wind still whispered. And sometimes at night Mina swore she could hear the echo of laughter carried on the breeze.